the next level in order to really sort of coalesce or understand what's happening and coalesce that into a strategy moving forward. Um, and really, there's been a lot of talk. We're talking about change due to COVID. We're talking about change due to societal forces out there. And that next level of leadership is really taking that talk and turning it into action, actually designing or redesigning new processes and systems in order to see new results. And that's kind of where we stand, and that's sort of the backdrop of this conversation today. So um, let's talk about why we need to make some changes to design or redesign some of our processes and systems. Well, there's major issues and some persistent problems in our industry today that we just need to be able to understand and tackle. And if we don't look to address them at a higher level, these issues could continue to get worse, and they won't transition into the opportunity that they can. And the way I look at issues and opportunities is they're really different sides of the same coin. And it's all about our perspective. So looking forward. So when I look at firms and I start to work with firm leadership, I really break down firms into four main people groups. There's the C-suite, principals, managers, and employees. And certainly in smaller organizations, the C-suite and the principals are one and the same. But when we think about some of the major issues that we need to tackle as leaders, one of those issues, and again, the flip side is the opportunity, is engagement. Where engagement issues happen in our organization, by and large, is at our manager and employee level. They can certainly happen everywhere. There's plenty of principals that might not be fully engaged. But when we think about engagement, we need to think primarily with our managers and employees. And often this engagement is tied to alignment, and more specifically, a lack of alignment of goals, interests, passions of the firm, the team, and the clients with those of the individual managers and employees. And in terms of engagement, relationships also play a major role. Gallup's number one most profound finding that they state after their 30 plus years of employee and organizational research is that 70% of the variance of employee engagement is one's direct supervisor. And so even if everything goes real well with an organization, we have a great mission, we have a great leadership team, we do great work, one's direct supervisor has the largest bearing on their team's engagement, the individual's engagement. Another major finding of Gallup is that 2/3 of managers are disengaged themselves. And that presents a persistent math problem because it's almost impossible for a manager who's disengaged and uninspired themselves to then engage and inspire others. And so this is why engagement continues to be an issue. Managers have a direct impact, but they're not engaged and inspired themselves. So the next sort of major issue and opportunity is burnout. And that's obviously, we're going to spend time talking about that today and breaking that down. Where that typically resides itself in organizations is in the principal and the manager levels. And in part due to workload, but as I'll be sharing today, it's not just about the workload. And these are particularly tough groups, principals and managers, because they often have dual roles that they haven't necessarily been trained for. So managers are typically, well, they're managing the projects, but they're also doing the projects. So there's that dual role. Principals often are doer sellers. So they're involved with the projects, but they're also going out to sell the work. And the problem is we've had little formal training. So in the management aspects, and particularly the selling aspects, that causes stress and strain, inefficiency, and certainly ineffectiveness. And that can all add to burnout. The last sort of major issue and opportunity I group as awareness. And this often manifests itself in the C-suite and with principals. And busyness is often to blame, but so is connection, and specifically maybe a disconnection from some of the day-to-day activities. And because of the position and some of the perks, typically engagement isn't a major issue because there is the position thing. I've been successful. There's a level of success to build on. I'm pretty engaged. I've got the position, and I might even have an ownership stake in the organization. And because principals and C-suite professionals have more control, and they might have less day-to-day deadlines, they might be less susceptible to burnout. And this is where leaders really need to sort of dig deep and get that next level of leadership. Despite being busy and despite not maybe feeling burned out, not maybe feeling that they personally have an engagement issue with themselves or with their direct peers, um, that doesn't mean it doesn't exist in the organization. And that doesn't mean that that harm is not being done. So a lot of the work I do with leadership teams and organizations is really to create a safe space around talking about burnout, talking about disengagement, where it manifests, how it manifests, and to get C-suite executives and principals on the same page with that language so that they can take charge and really get on to the talking about business strategy, talking about mission, talking about growth, talking about how to extend profits, how to redefine winning in the organization. Particularly when there's, just with change and change management, there's typically some denial and some resistance to change. So it's really understanding the awareness piece so that we can figure out, do they exist, where do they exist, and what is our best strategy moving forward? And so I want to dive into burnout. And I want to, in particular, as I mentioned on the last slide, whereas burnout affects our managers and our principals, it really affects the heart of our organization, responsible for driving so much of our success. But before I dig into some of the mechanics of burnout, I want to take a step back and talk about whether burnout is really a problem. Over the last couple of years, I've spoken quite a bit about burnout. And one of the larger venues I spoke at was a live webinar, national people from around the country, probably 500 or 600 people, different levels and organizations. We asked a poll question. This was pre-COVID. This was May 2019, and we simply asked, "Is burnout a problem in our industry?" 87% thought it was a legitimate concern or responded it was a legitimate concern. 7% thought an epidemic, 6% thought it was overblown. Last fall at the AEC Elevate conference here, with this conference, but live in Las Vegas last fall, we had a session and we presented the same question. 2/3 of the respondents stated that burnout was a legitimate concern, and 1/3 thought it was an epidemic. Since that time, over the end of the fall of last year and into the early part of 2020, this was more of the trend, that burnout was considered, a much higher percentage thought it was an epidemic than even just a year before, but almost everybody thinking it was a legitimate concern. And this has continued in COVID. I've given this, several presentations to groups of 20 to 100 individuals from, industry groups, but then also within firms. And this tends to be the ratio. Sometimes it moves to 50-50, but the vast majority, everyone thinking burnout is a legitimate concern, but more and more people thinking it's an epidemic. And in fact, just last week, I was at a forum for senior executives, about 200 people on the call. And the question that was posed was, have you seen signs of burnout during COVID? And 4 out of 5 of the executives surveyed said yes. So about 80% see signs of burnout. So that's sort of how we see it in the industry. I just want to make one more point, sort of big picture, thinking about burnout, that goes beyond our industry. In May of last year, so May 2019, the World Health Organization redefined burnout, what that looked like. And they reclassified it as an occupational phenomenon. And really what that did is it legitimized that work and workplace was associated with burnout, and that it wasn't just an individual personal thing. And so some of the concerns are that does that open up the door for workers' compensation? Does that open up the door for employment practices? Because this is now associated with the workplace, not an individual phenomenon. So the bottom line is, as it relates to burnout, even before COVID, Burnout was being felt in our industry, and now it's being legitimized across industries and around the world. And so, what I want to do now is get into the mechanics of burnout so we can build some common language and understandings too, as we look to address it in our organization if it exists. So, um, I want to talk about burnout in the context of the burnout disengagement cycle, because burnout and disengagement are connected and they can actually feed into each other. But I want to make a couple of points before I begin. First, although anyone in an organization can be affected by burnout, when we think about burnout, we should be thinking about it in the context of our highest achievers, not our middlers or not our low achievers, unless they were once high achievers and something happened and they stopped, in which case we really want to be able to sort of unpack what has happened. Um, when we look to address burnout as an organization, we're really investing in our long-term health and value, because our organization's value is based on our talent and their interest in sticking around and creating a culture of others that want to stick around and create growth. So we have to think about it of health and value. And there's one other point I want to make, and there's a canary in the coal mine aspect with burnout. And that's an analogy that Dr. Christine Maslach uses. She talks about organizational and occupational burnout. There's certainly an individual component at play, a drive to succeed, a drive to please, commitment to get the job done, project after project, year after year, and we can lose ourselves in that pursuit. But there's also an organizational component, and that even if we are, or our team, are the healthiest canaries possible, if we keep sending them into the coal mine with no controls, no improvements, they will eventually get sick and our organization will be in trouble. So that being said, now let's talk about some of the mechanics of burnout. And I want to kind of walk through this column here. And one of the points I want to make too is that burnout is not just about the work or the workload, but for many professionals, our industry included, burnout starts with what I term prolonged work overload. And this can be the case even if everything else is perfect inside of our organization in terms of leadership, in terms of the work we do, in terms of the mission. So if we step back and say, okay, let's assume everything is perfect, less the fact there's this thing called prolonged work overload, and it's even with work that I love to do. What I mean by prolonged work overload is it's not just a busy project or a busy proposal season. What it is it's really back to back to back busy seasons, when every season feels like a harvest season, year after year, and even decade after decade. And the fact is, being all in and producing fruit all the time, it doesn't work in nature and it doesn't work with us unless we design better systems and better ways to work. So if we have prolonged work overload, what that eventually leads to is overwhelm, if we kind of walk down through the column. Once we hit overwhelm, if that continues, we hit exhaustion. And there's different aspects of exhaustion: mental, physical, and emotional exhaustion. Reaching the point of exhaustion is a big red flag. Our ability to take on more or even care for what we have is significantly diminished. You might notice low energy, low interest as it relates to our work. It's starting to manifest. If exhaustion continues, that's what leads to burnout. And our conscious or unconscious reaction to separate ourselves from the pain is to disengage. That's when disengagement happens as related to burnout. And what we eventually do is we pivot away. We might pivot to a side hustle. We might take our interests and energy and passion and move it outside the organization into the side hustle. And at work, then we're just present. It's that presenteeism. We might just leave. We might just go to a competitor. We could choose to do early retirement, or we could just get out of the industry and start doing something different, which as an industry, we just can't afford to do. And the fact is, everyone has a different threshold. It could take 1, 2, 10 years, or even a couple of decades to reach the point of overwhelm, exhaustion, or burnout. For me, it was about 20 years as a high achiever to reach the point of burnout. And I probably spent several years sort of floating around in this disengagement, burnout disengagement cycle. So I want to talk a little bit more about this cycle. I mentioned even if everything is perfect in our organizations and with our leadership teams, that is often not the case. Not everything is always perfect. And number one, because we're human. And number two, because our organizations are filled with humans. And our work and our client demands rightfully reprioritize our actions from time to time. And it's just part of the joy and the commitment and life in our industry. And the fourth reason is we change, or we are changed by external factors, say a pandemic or changing social constructs, where we really change and work changes for us, and that sort of fuels. And so what I want to talk about is the right side of this sort of connection with the burnout disengagement cycle. And there's a series of elements that don't sort of chronologically feed like burnout does, but they sort of, there's a series of things that aren't necessarily connected or work in different orders, but that time and time again lead to what I call work frustrations, which feed this cycle. Starting at the top, there's often this loss of efficacy. And really what that is, it's a feeling that the work that we do is really not that important anymore. It really doesn't matter to us anymore. We might have fallen out of love with it. It just doesn't have the same meaning and purpose it used to. It could be because it's prolonged work overload, or it could be other factors at play. Along these lines, we could have a lost or a buried mission or vision that I don't really understand what the organization stands for anymore. I don't know what my role is in that. And I just feel lost as far as that North Star. There could be outdated reward and incentive systems, recognition systems that just sort of just start to cut at the at someone's frustrations, or create the frustrations and frictions in the organization. There can be changing intrinsic motivations, especially as we transition between our various work and life seasons. And I'll be talking a little bit more about that later in the presentation, because operating out of sync with our work and life seasons can be a significant contributor to burnout and disengagement. And finally, goodwill, just feeling like our goodwill is gone. It's been consumed. And this was the case even before COVID. As we're planning that next transition, that next succession plan. Oh, after that next project, we can do this, or let's do this now before we exact that change. Hold on, just one more year. So we feel like there's that loss. Certainly with COVID, so many of us have risen to the challenge. We've made changes. Now my goodwill is really consumed. And all those can be that work frustration piece. The next piece, because we don't operate in a vacuum, and no matter how much we try to compartmentalize work and life, we can't, especially when there's no physical separation of work and life today. So really, we're very much in tune today with our personal side. When we take into consideration, when a lot of professionals, high achieving professionals, take into consideration their personal side, there can be a series of frustrations that stack up and can start driving this burnout disengagement cycle. It often starts with missing out. So we're just not appropriately balanced. We haven't developed new hobbies. We're not spending enough time with friends and family. We feel like we're not learning any new skills. Back when we could travel, we weren't traveling as much as we would like to. And that can be frustrating, and cause friction for a lot of professionals. And it's very personal. And if it happens over time, over a long time, there can be this feelings of even resentment. And that's just further fuel to this burnout disengagement cycle. So a couple of notes on burnout. One, it almost always takes a lot of time to get here. And it's going to take some time to get out if you're here. And if you're in this spot, or someone in your team is in this spot, there's a number of elements at play. Again, it's not just about the work, but burnout, it can be reversed. It can be prevented moving forward. We just need a strategy to understand and start unpacking and addressing all of these elements, one at a time. As it relates to COVID, there's a little bit of a film that's over this burnout disengagement cycle today as it relates to COVID, because there is some real fear out there. There's anxieties and even trauma associated with COVID-19. And a lot of the social change and the social disruption that's happening in the concerns we have moving forward. And in that mode, it's just an extended crisis. And that crisis can either mask or magnify burnout and disengagement. So as a leadership team, we've got to be aware of, is COVID and the times that we're going through, is it masking some of these underlying conditions, or is it magnifying them? We've got to be aware. And as leaders, we have to be aware of how that's affecting our team. And my goal with sharing this today is to really break this down so that, as specifically as leaders, we now have a better language and a baseline so that we can start to address it with our team and have greater growth as a result of that. And so some of the questions are, where are you? Where are you as a leader? Where are you personally? Where's your team? Do we know where our team is at? And then as an organization, we're in our organization hats, what are some of these opportunities to improve now that we understand burnout and disengagement in their relation? Because even if we can be successful, we might still have some opportunities, and we still might not solve all of our issues. So what can we look to do? Certainly from an organizational perspective, we can look to enhance our work and our workflow systems. We can have better training and development, certainly with the people skills, the essential skills, the soft skills, but also with scope, schedule, and budget. Also with what is marketing, what is branding, how do I write proposals? I mean, there's a lot of training and development we can do to remove some of the frictions. We can also have better recruiting and retention to deal with some of the prolonged work overload, right? I mean, if we had more quality people in the organization and they stayed, that would help address that. But as I mentioned, even if we can address the prolonged work overload issue, we might not address burnout and disengagement in our organizations unless, and in fact, we're probably not. Because as I mentioned, it's the prolonged work overload that triggers this burnout disengagement cycle. But once it's there, we understand, we see a lot, we have personally frustrated, we might have work frustrations and frictions. And what we really need to understand is that we have to address the whole aspect. And so when it comes to designing or redesigning new processes and systems, we need a better strategy, and we need to play a bigger game that just goes beyond, trying to develop a better work-life experience. And so I want to dive into that. But before I do, we've just hit some of the highlights as it relates to burnout and disengagement related to burnout. And I want to share with you a couple of resources that you can explore yourself in with your team. And one is a quiz. It was originally developed working with a team, and we were discussing what's the difference between overwhelm and burnout. How do you deal with one? They're both very different elements, very different phenomena, and there's very different strategies associated with it. And certainly if you're feeling overwhelmed, if you sort of deal with it, then it might not progress to burnout. And so there's a quiz to sort of figure out where you might be, and then some of the strategies on how you deal with both. I mean, if you take the quiz, you actually get both reports. And then the other element I have available is I just shared important chapters of the book. You can download it in text form. You can download it in audio forms. You can go for a walk and just listen. It breaks down some of these components of burnout. And again, feel free to contact me if you want to dig deeper into these issues, or you want these links moving forward too. So, all right, that being said, what do I mean about designing or redesigning our processes and systems beyond just a better experience as a way to prevent burnout and increase engagement? And so what I want to use as a context for this is I want to leverage the ideas that were written in a book about 20 years ago written by Joseph Pine and James Gilmore, entitled The Experience Economy. And in the book, they broke down the scale of economic value. And what they did is they started with commodities, and they worked up to goods and services and experiences. And what they did was said, okay, well, there's a difference between each one. And if we're going to advance our organizations forward, we need to sort of be cognizant of this and sort of design different levels to increase the value of what we're producing. And so just as an analogy, as sort of a quick analogy, a good is worth more than a commodity. And so, and for example, we'll pay more for an apple pie than we will for the handful of apples that are in that pie. And a service is worth more than a good So we'll pay more for a fresh baked apple pie delivered to our door than we will for one in the grocery store. So that home delivery service is worth more than the apple pie good that sits in the grocery store. And if we take it one step further, an experience is going to be worth more than the service. And so if we were to be able to have the opportunity to go pick our own apples, and then bake our own apples on site in the orchard's, gourmet kitchen as part of a gourmet cooking class, we will spend more for that. And so that's the example that they were using. And so one of the specific examples that they used in the book was Starbucks. And this book was 20 years ago. And so at the time, Starbucks was seeing a resurgence, and they broke down how Starbucks at the time, and continues today, they were innovatively taking the commodity, the coffee bean, and they were using that to make a great cup of coffee, which was the good. And what they did is they standardized and tailored a process to deliver that same cup of coffee to customers anywhere that they wanted. So that was the service. But they went one level further, and they really focused on the experience. And because they wanted to deliver that service, that good cup of coffee, consistent all the time, the way you like it, with a smile and with professional baristas, and however they wanted to produce their service, they wanted to produce it in an environment that was one that was convenient, cool vibe, and you could hang out, you could sit, it had played music. They wanted to create an experience. And as part of that, their strategy was, we're going to pay 2, 3, 5 times more for a cup of coffee. And the experience was the key, but it was actually more than that. So the reason why Starbucks has consistently gotten us to pay 2 to 5 times more for a cup of coffee and keep coming back wasn't just taste, service alone, and the experience. It was because they really dove into the last level, the highest value of economic development, the highest level of economic value, and that's transformation. And so what they wanted to do was they wanted to transform the experience. And so by allowing guests to hang out in their coffee shop, cool vibe, comfortable coffee shops, they wanted the transformational experience to take place there with them. Meetings with friends, meetings with families, colleagues, job interviews, first dates, study clubs, book clubs, quiet places to get through that semester. They wanted transformational experience to be associated with their environment, their goods and services. And they have historically been successful. So what does this mean for us in AEC? We have the same issue with trying to differentiate on our goods and services. And my bridge is better than your bridge, and our design school is better than your school, and our phase 1 site assessment is better. So in job interviews and proposals, we're trying to differentiate on our goods and services, our products. And we do have unique competitive advantages. We have unique ways of doing things, and we need to do a better job. There's also, we could have whole sessions talking about how to design a better client experience, to leverage those goods and services to create more loyalty and better market branding, and also employee experiences. So as we're delivering those services, how do we have better employee experiences? But they're all going to fall short if we don't create transformational experiences as part of that. And so we really have to design our experiences on purpose for transformation. And there's major differences between employee satisfaction and employee happiness versus employee engagement. If we design our experiences for transformation, that's more akin to true employee engagement and growth, versus just designing better experiences is more akin to sort of chasing employee happiness. It's a one-way relationship, and it just often has a short shelf life. And so what does this mean for us? So if we're looking at minimizing, reducing, preventing burnout, increasing our engagement, we need to design our experiences for transformation. So from an employee perspective, from a practical perspective, when we look to leverage our platforms and redesign our processes and systems, from an employee perspective, we need to train and develop our employees to reach their highest potential, have their highest and best use, both at work and beyond work, so that they can win at both work and life. So that's, we're going to take your career development journey. We're going to look to transform your knowledge, your experience, and your position, your ability to win at work and life. That's going to be a transformational experience that even if an employee ends up leaving your firm, you still have the ambassadorship and the loyalty associated with that. From a client perspective, are we helping clients see the way that they do their work in transformative ways? Are we helping them to change the way they can see, change the way they can do their work, change the way that they serve their constituents for the better? And can we do that through our designs? That's going to be a transformational experience, not just a better client experience. From a community perspective, are we helping the communities that we live, work, serve, and play and care about to grow and prosper, not just through our projects? We certainly want to be able to do that through our projects, but can we do that through better or more strategic corporate impact design? And then certainly from an organizational perspective, how do we grow and succeed as a result of this investment, not just in experiences, but in transformation? So, all right. With our goal to prevent burnout and increase engagement, particularly as leaders, we've gone from talking about the mechanics of burnout to a strategy of better designing processes and systems by targeting transformation. What can this look like in practice? And what are the business benefits to doing so? For this, I want to combine the power of meaning and purpose with logic. Something that we do all the time, right? So as a reformed 100% practitioner who grew to love people and organizations, to me, this makes perfect sense. And it allows me as now a management consultant to sort of leverage the things that I needed to sort of get to that next level. And so one of the tools I want to turn to is the logic model for work today. And in general, a logic model has 4 components. And it has inputs, activities, outputs, and outcomes. And these are basically all the ingredients that go into and need to be measured in order to achieve a desired result. And so I want to lay this out and walk through this in full form. And so in professional services, and certainly in our industry, our inputs are our employees. That's our biggest asset. That's the biggest thing we bring to the table as it relates to work, and that's our employees. And so that's our input. Our activity is normally work. But if we want to truly engage today, and if we want to produce better value for our clients, we need work with meaning and purpose. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about what that is and what that looks like. But if we just sort of park that from there, work and meaning and purpose. Our outputs it's the value we produce for our clients. It's what we get paid for. It's the planning, it's design, it's the constructed facilities, it's the site investigations. That's our output. That's our value. And if we do all those things well over time, we get organizational growth and profits. That's the outcome, the ultimate goal. We can't just turn on growth and we can't just turn on profits. All those things done well over time create organizational growth and profits. So, but here in this target logic model, for the new era, for the era that we're in today, when we have employee engagement, and that's got to be a target of ours, and all the data confirms this, when we have employee engagement, we have the opportunity to increase the value that we can deliver for our projects and our clients, and thus increase the growth and profitability of our firms. Certainly the business case for much better and higher levels of employee engagement for sure. We also have the opportunity to create a thriving culture, which reinforces employee engagement. And this creates this virtuous cycle you can see in the golden arrows. And so even when there's scenarios that disrupt our work with meaning and purpose, something that triggers all this, but if there's a pandemic, if there's a merger or an acquisition, if we lose an important project, if we have problems, if we have a really tough project, if my boss retires, if my best friend just left and went to another firm, we have disruption with our work, and work and meaning and purpose is questioned for a while. When we have a thriving culture, it protects us. It protects us from those disruptions. It protects us from the pandemic and all the inevitable hard times. And so that has to be an outcome that we strive for as organizational leaders, not just growth, not just profits, but a culture that can support our employee engagement when work gets disrupted. And so there's a lot that goes into culture design, but it's worth it because it's so powerful, as you can see here in this logic model. So let me get back to work with meaning and purpose. Again, it's a trigger of all this. And so first thing I want to say is work with meaning and purpose is very individual. But like burnout, there's an organizational component with it also. And so from an individual perspective, meaning is individual. It's circumstantial and it evolves over time. Purpose, on the other hand, is much more easily manageable and understood in terms of helping leaders and organizations achieve this target logic model. And what do I mean by that? So there's really only three types of purpose in terms of work. There's work that serves a purpose. So this helps me put food on the table. This provides a roof over the head for my family. The work is cool, but the work is serving a purpose for me. It's something different. It's that, again, that food on the table. The second type of purpose is that I find purpose in my work. And so, whether it be a water treatment facility or designing schools or cleaning up contaminated sites, I find purpose in the work that I'm doing to solve problems for society. And certainly this is where organizations who invest in mission and vision, they have a great advantage because they can attract people who can find purpose in their work. They've been able to articulate what that mission and vision is. More and more people can find purpose in the work. The third level, the last level of purpose or type of purpose, it's when work is part of a larger life purpose that we're now able to advance day to day through what we do at the office. And none of these types of purpose is better or worse than another. But if we want to tap in and help provide work with meaning and purpose for all of our employees to drive this value chain, that we need to understand the role work plays with them, the purpose that work plays in their lives. And with that, we can start to align. We can deal with the engagement. We can align goals, interests, and passions that they have with those of the firm and the clients and our teams. And so one tangible framework or strategy to begin to do so is to better understand and try to align with our work and life systems, or our work and life seasons. And so what does that look like? I'm going to break that down. We're still doing good with time, well with time. So the graphic I'm about to show you is one that we could spend a long time talking about and going through. And it's one of the most commented on graphics that I have in my book, but it's very key to better understanding what might be driving us and what might be driving people on our team and in our organization, and then help us better position our relationships and our different meetings to be able to talk with people and prevent burnout and help our employees stay in love with what they do, help ourselves stay in love with what we do. And so in general, we have, as a framework, we have 4 work seasons. And so for the first 10 years of our career, we call that the master our craft season. So this is from coming out of school, not knowing what we don't know, to being in responsible charge of work. Sometimes that can take a decade. And everyone's got a different pace, but again, think about this as a framework to think about work with meaning and purpose. So this gets us from, again, coming out of school to being registered, certified, in whatever we do, getting our professional licensure, and it lasts that 10 years. Once we've mastered our craft, we then move into the next season, which could be the next 15 years of our career. And that's really kind of make a name for ourselves season. We might be looking to get into, be more of a technical guru. We might look to get into management or leadership, building on our mastering our technical aspects of what we need to do. We're looking to make a name for ourselves. About halfway through our career, we shift into wanting to make a difference. And I call this, looking to leverage our stage, our skills, talents, assets, gifts, and experiences in different ways. I've already mastered my craft. I've already made a name. And yes, there's still work to do on those, but by and large, I've done that. I'm in the red zone. I want to make a difference. And maybe, from Chad's presentation, if some of the older folks in their career, people the second half and up, if they're not seeing a lot of those career development opportunities, this makes this even more important for them to be able to want to make a difference. Again, leverage what they have already built in terms of mastery, and making a name for themselves, make a difference, either internal to the organization or external, or even in some other aspects of life. And then we transition into wanting to leave a legacy, and that's really investing into the next generation. And so, as I mentioned, because we don't live in a vacuum, because we bring our whole selves to work, we also have life seasons. And so, again, as a framework, we really have three major life seasons. And again, the assumption here is somebody's in a family season, and if it's not you, it's probably someone on your team who has chosen the family route. But again, looking at it as a framework, the first 10 years of our adult life, we can think of that as more of a me or a we season. So it's an individual and a spouse, or an individual and a spouse and a dog, and that sort of is there our 20s, or maybe our early 30s. And one of the aspects of looking at work and life in tandem is that there are times when our work and our life seasons are complementary, and times when our work and life seasons can be in conflict. And so certainly when we're looking to master our craft, if we're in this me or we season, we might have more time flexibility to invest in all the things that we didn't learn in school to be able to become an expert practitioner. So we've got that time flexibility. So these two seasons, master our craft and our me and we season, can be very complementary. If we move down further into our careers, if we are trying to make a name for ourselves, and if we are in a family season, and that family season overall can be 20 years, but certainly broken into the raising phase and then letting go phase, very distinct phases. But if we're looking to make a name for ourselves, all the gray areas that we have to work in to be successful, and we're in the family raising phase, and all the extra work that goes into that, they could be in conflict. And so certainly flexibility is key in that. And then empty nest seasons, it's another possible complementary season where we want to make a difference. We've sort of see life in new ways. We might have more time to invest in the organization. That can be a very complementary season to what our goals are. There are also a lot of generational aspects that I won't get into, but there's tremendous convergence amongst the generations today as it relates to so many different aspects of what we're doing, and if we're just aware of those. So a couple of key points as it relates to work and life seasons. Our goals and interests and passions, and those of our employees and our clients, are most often tied to our seasons. Understanding and being able to tap into these as part of a true relationship and not assumptions. We can get ourselves into a lot of trouble if we make assumptions based on what we think someone's work-life season is and what their goals that they want. But in relationship, if we can tap into these work and life seasons, it's very powerful in terms of developing work with meaning and purpose, and having engagement, and reducing some of those work frustrations and those work frictions that can contribute to the burnout disengagement cycle. And again, it can help position us to help our employees win at both work and life, which is one of those new era shifts that we have to be cognizant of. The second aspect I want to talk about or just mention here is that each season transition is hard to navigate, whether it be our work transitioning from master of craft to make a name. There could be conflict and confusion in that. It's not easy to say, well, you've been doing this, for years. Why don't you want to do it now? Or, the internally, externally, there's a lot of identity. There's a lot of expectations. There's a lot of opportunities involved. But if we as leaders and managers can help our employees navigate these seasons, not just in the office, but help them navigate them through life, we can create much more of an opportunity to engage our employees. And you might say, like, helping our talent navigate, and it sounds like I'm customizing a career and customizing opportunities. This is certainly much more work than it was in the past. There's much more involved with it, but there's such a huge upside if we're willing to do it. In terms of, if we think to the target logic model, in terms of employee engagement, value creation, growth and success of our organization, if we can navigate this and we can customize career opportunities, keep our employees having work with meaning and purpose, there's such an upside. And one other point I want to make is this is really no different than other major trends that we face outside of work, our life overall. Everything that we're involved with is being customized and curated, right? Everything's extreme, but a lot of what we're doing is being customized and curated for us. So if we think about our buying habits, Amazon, they recommend products, they're understanding us, they're learning us, and they're making recommendations, customized and curated. Our music, Pandora, Spotify, whatever it is, they're curating a playlist for us. Movies, Netflix, social media, it's all, our feeds are being curated for us. And the fact is, we collectively expect to be better understood and better served individually. So, looking to wrap up and having some time for questions. So, we've covered a lot of ground. And the first takeaway in terms of leadership, engagement, and preventing burnout in a world of COVID is to recognize that we're in a new era and that we need to act differently. The demographic and societal shifts are real and they're not going away. We need to recognize and adjust at all levels in our organization if we want to have success. We've got to see COVID-19 as an opportunity. We've got to see some of the change dynamics that are going on that are affecting all of our employees in different ways. We need to see that as an opportunity. And no matter how well we've responded over the last couple of months, no matter how well we've responded over the last 6 months with COVID, we have a long way to go. I used to think we were in halftime, but maybe it's the end of the first quarter. Who knows? We have a long way to go. We need to leverage COVID as the opportunity so that we can move forward better. As leaders, leadership teams, we need to understand and prevent burnout in our organization. It is a major issue today that we've got to be able to head on and face up and tackle. It's not just a new phenomena. This is sort of a growing phenomena that we've got to take on finally and formally as we move forward, because it's about our people and it's about our organization's long-term health and value. And although we are in a very technical industry, meaning and purpose matters. We've got to design our systems and processes for transformation, not just a better experience. And we have to get to that level. It's more than our products and services. We've got to create better experiences, but we have to design them for transformation. And we've got to, when we look at driving our organizational growth and success, we need to do that through engagement and culture. And we have to engage our people in the context of their seasons. That's the way to create work with meaning and purpose that triggers that entire cycle. And we got to start with you. We got to start with me. We can't let fatigue set in. We can't let burnout or disengagement set in. Leadership is tough. And we need to be able to and cognizant of the need to put our own oxygen mask on first if necessary. And then we have to look to engage others. We need to be in this together organizationally as leaders and as leadership teams if we're finally going to solve these persistent problems and turn them into the opportunities that they can be. And we have to invest in our awareness. We've got to strategically redesign those processes and systems and really get to next level and new era strategic planning in leadership and management development. And so with that, we do have a little bit of time for questions here, and feel free to reach out to me. So Olivia, I guess I'll transition back over to you.
Awesome. And I think Chad is going to hop on here in a second to close it out.
Yeah, Olivia, you're going to have to authorize my video.
Oh.
Well, hey, thanks, Pete, for that. Awesome stuff. So relevant to, always has been, as busy as the industry has been in the last several years, but man, add COVID to it, man, it's like more relevant than ever. And I love your seasons of life graphic, man. When I read that in your book, man, it was just, that really resonated with me. So again, if you guys have any questions for Pete, his email address is both in the chat. You can also see it on the screen. Reach out to him, or Olivia can connect you with him. Thanks for joining us on day 2 of our 8-week Elevate journey. Next week, we start a full week, Monday through Thursday, of just various things that I talked about on the previous session. If you're able to join me. If you want a copy of my slides that I shared earlier today, let me know. And hopefully we'll see you starting next week.
We did have one
And
question come in, Chad.
okay,
So
excellent.
at least the first. And so the question is actually another one too, that how do managers engage their staff when the entire organization is remote? The same way you would engage your staff if they're in another office than you during more normal times. I think it's through relationship. It's certainly through Zoom. It's having those conversations, creating that safety, having things to talk about. A little bit that was in the last session about really being intentional with engaging. But I think you as the leader, you have the power position as a leader. You just look to open the conversation and be able to sort of create the safety zone so that you can understand really what's driving. And again, if you get to what's the meaning and what's the purpose of work, a lot of conversations can stem from there. Another question is, what are the most effective practical processes and systems that you have seen? A lot of it comes into intentionality. There's a lot of strategic thinking. There's a lot of leadership and management development thought that goes into how do you increase engagement realistically? How do you do it with the context of the clients? And how do you really look to reduce burnout, long-term investment versus the short-term needs? A lot of it is it's tweaking your processes and systems, sometimes reimagining them, but it's developing new habits within the work. So we want to develop some of those habits within our day-to-day work and not just some new level to sort of layer on because we just won't do it. So the practical is in the day-to-day habits associated with creating those outcomes that we want, and then sort of backtracking to some of those outputs that lead into the outcomes. One other question here is, how does your seasons of life graphic adapt to the non-traditional employee? I fear it puts people in a box or traditional construct. Yeah, certainly everyone's going to be different. Everyone transitions into those seasons at different times, and some people don't have those seasons. And so I think it's a framework to start having to thinking about things differently, not just at work, but in life. And how do you sort of put together a map to be able to engage your team, but first off, yourself, thinking about what does drive me, what am I interested in today? What drives someone at 30 and 40 is different than what drives them at 20. And so it's certainly, the goal is to create a framework to be able to get to that deeper level. We're all individuals. We collectively serve clients, and we collectively have the benefit of leverage the organization for collective results, but it's all individually driven. And that's just a product that we think about in society today. And that's just where we're going. It's an I career, it's an I work, it's an I life. And so we've got to translate things down to the individual level. And certainly if you have more questions or want to dive deeper, feel free to reach out with the contact information.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Pete. I did put your email address in the chat if anyone is needing that, and I will include it in the follow-up email with the certificate of completion. But thank you again for joining us, Pete, and thank you everyone for joining us for this session. We hope that you join us for the sessions next week. Oh, we did have one more question come in, Pete, if you have time.
Let's do it. Okay. This isn't really a question, okay, but read an article this morning that as humans we're wired for small bursts of fight or flight states of being, but right now we've been in this state for months. The human isn't designed to live in this kind of stress. I imagine there's a lot of fatigue and burnout. Absolutely. That's one of the, we're in crisis. So the way our brains work is, the first thing it's fight or flight. Am I safe? It's actually fight, flight, or freeze. And then based on that, we sort of get into the emotional level and then the analytical. I think that's a reality. There's a lot of stress and anxiety and angst, concerns and fears. We've got to understand that. But if we can move then towards sort of thinking about things even emotionally or analytically, we can get to a spot where we can start putting things in perspective. But certainly, I think the fact that we are in crisis mode and we're not made to be in that for long bursts is part of that fatigue. And so how do we work through a process to sort of move in to think about things analytically, I think is a key aspect. And that's a key leadership opportunity to take the temperature down, to engage people in different ways so that we can start talking about, you know, the future and the present in ways that aren't crisis mode and sort of bring things together in a very analytical way, but recognizing that people are in crisis. So that's that empathy piece. That as leaders, we've got to wear these multiple hats at the same time, but in relationship, we can sort of figure out where everybody is and sort of go down the road together.
Awesome. Okay, well, that looks like all the questions. I'll go ahead and end this, and the recording will be available on the learning session page in a few hours or by the end of the day tomorrow. But okay, thanks guys. Thanks Pete, thanks Chad.
Great day.
Okay, bye everyone.